Right, so here we are, back again. Can't believe, where did October go? October just disappeared. Here we are, November 7th. Oh man, it's November 7th already. Closing in on the end of 2019.
Wow.
Couldn't come at a even better time than now. You know, what a 2019 we've had. So, so tonight we finish up our 3-part series on the Antichrist. And, as you were saying, Ben, a little quick recap. Last week we didn't meet last Thursday. We met on Wednesday to finish our 2-part series on Halloween, the satanic roots of Halloween. And then Thursday night we went out and did our street evangelism blitz, which was very successful. And so we were able to get out approximately 3,500 tracts. And so, it was surprising. And so thanks to Ben, Steve, Genevieve, and all you guys, and Albert came. And our little team, went up and down Lincoln Road Mall in the midst of the revelries and all that. And surprisingly, I thought it was pretty well received. What about you guys? What kind of responses did you guys get? Because we kind of split up after a while because we were all doing stuff.
And it's so crowded eventually.
I lost you guys. And kept having to, fortunately, run back to the vet to get where all the tracks were kept because we couldn't carry 3,500 tracks. So I had to keep running back to the car, which fortunately we got a nice little parking spot in the New World Symphony Orchestra Garage, and we were able to keep feeding the tracks. So how did you guys find it?
It was interesting to watch the progression from family-friendly kid stuff. As the night progressed, things got more and more adult, in terms of the costumes and the
lack of costumes.
Yeah, and the lack of it.
At one point, one girl was walking around with no clothes, right?
Oh my goodness, she had gold paint, so she wasn't
made
over
everybody
it.
gold. But everybody was surprisingly nice. I thought even people after they had been drinking a little bit. I went up to one guy accidentally, like for the second or third time as I was making my rounds, and he was sitting down. He's like, "No, I got one." He pulled the track out of his pocket. He said, I'm partying, having a good time now, but I promise you tomorrow I'm going to sit down and I'm going to read the whole thing. And I was like, all right, cool. Enjoy your night and take a look and see. Give it a shot tomorrow. So hopefully, a lot of good stuff will come of that. So, so the Halloween evangelism blitz went really well. And if we're here next year and the rapture hasn't occurred yet, God willing, we will give it a shot again.
Thanks everyone for your prayers.
Amen.
So,
that was a good thing. So, speaking of prayers, our friend Scott, he sent gospel for Africa. They had a rally in Ivory Coast. They're in Ivory Coast right now because they're based in South Africa. Johannesburg and a couple of surrounding cities, but they went to the Ivory Coast this weekend for our conference. I guess there's like a little church that's planted there, and they were trying to help build up the church. It's kind of like what the book Apostle Paul did in the book of Acts, traveling in Africa, because they're different countries. Like instead of from city to city, they were going from country to country, helping to establish little evangelical churches. So he sent some videos and stuff like that, pictures of them. So so he sent some more stuff today. He thanked us for our prayers, and it looks like they're doing really well. And I'm assuming they're going to finish up on the Ivory Coast later this week, get back. So it's good to see small little house church type organizations doing things for the Lord, because commercial churches jump the shark. I posted an article, a commentary on Facebook on the Kanye West thing. I didn't see Genevieve liking on it, but Steve went there and read it. So go on our Facebook page. Did you see my commentary on the?
No, I didn't on Facebook. You said the text.
No, It's the same as I put on. Go on the Facebook page. I know, one person responded, "Who the and supposedly a Christian? Who the HELL? Appointed you guys to judge? Well, the Bible said, and I put all the verses right in the commentary. Doesn't the Bible say that we're supposed to? When Greg Laurie tells Christians to shut up, don't you dare criticize Kanye West, doesn't the church, as Bible-believing followers of Jesus, have an obligation to say, wait a minute, we know this man's fruit. He's been calling himself God and even blaspheming Jesus by calling himself Jesus
Yep.
for the past 6 years. He was supposedly Christian even before he started calling himself God, and now he's just continuing on with the new version of Christianity, which, by the way, I didn't even know at the time I wrote my commentary, which, again, you can find the South Beach Gospel Ministries Facebook page. If you scroll down, you'll see I posted the Greg Laurie video. It's only a couple of minutes long, where he's really sharply telling Christians to shut up and stop criticizing Kanye. And I attached the commentary to it, and I put all the verses in there. But, you know, I noted that Kanye West is selling, you know, the sweatshirt and sweatpants combo for $490, or separately for $500. So you save $10 if you buy them together. And it's got like 14th century iconography, Roman Catholic artist depictions of Jesus blazed all over the shirt, which obviously is, you know, it's idolatry.
Yeah.
It's making an image of God which was punishable by death in the Old Testament, and clearly something that the Babylonian Harlot Catholic Church, which we're going to talk about tonight, has been doing since its inception. And so we know that by doing these things that Kanye West is, in my opinion, a harbinger of the false pseudo-Christian church that will be ruled over by the Antichrist. And that's the topic for tonight, the Antichrist. And do we see the signs of the approach of the Antichrist? Do we see the apostasia of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2? The twofold meaning of the word apostasia means a departure doctrinally, followed by departure physically. It can be a physical departure from, Will Trevor, my friend, the Michigan News reporter down here for NBC, say, hey, I got tickets to the Michigan State game, let's go. So we're going to depart, if the rapture doesn't occur first, from Miami to go to Ann Arbor to be at the Michigan State game in person. That's a physical departure from an airport. But there's also a different type of apostasia or departure. It can be, I used to believe this was the truth. I thought evolution was the truth. Ben, has taught on that topic. But now that I understand science better, I understand that all those things I read in the Bible were true. Now I've departed from my secular humanist believing, my secular humanist worldview, and have accepted the biblical creation worldview. That's another departure.
Thank God.
So we have that as an example of what an apostasy is or a departure is. And so what we then find is that Kanye West and what he's doing is part and parcel of what I believe is the last days pseudo-Christian cult of Christianity that will be on the earth at the time of the rise of the Antichrist and will replace biblical Christianity. So we're seeing the rhetorical or ideological departure first, and then the actual physical departure, I believe, comes shortly thereafter. So if Kanye West is now in league with Greg Laurie of Harvest Christian Fellowship, who is really the flagship Calvary Chapel church in the country now that Chuck Smith has died, if they're teaming up, and I understand now that Joel Osteen, who has one of the biggest churches in the country, has invited Kanye to come preach at his church, Lakewood, Christian church in Houston, Texas. So the guy who has been for the last 6 to 10 years calling himself God and referring himself as Jesus, all while maintaining that he's been a Christian since the very beginning. His first real hit was called Jesus Walks, which was a rap song which perverted the gospel of Jesus. Yeah. And so now he's got this new album called Jesus is King, which is true, Jesus is King. But which Jesus is he talking about? He's not talking about my King Jesus. He's talking about the Antichrist Jesus, who is the counterfeit. I listened to samples from every track on the record. Yeah, there's some nice gospel-y sounding songs I sang in gospel choirs, travel all over the country in gospel choirs, so I like, a certain genre of gospel music, and you got a 4 or 5 part harmony. Man, that can sound really awesome when you got just voices replacing, instruments. But there's also blasphemy in there, and there's also dark and occultic sounding music syncretized in with words about Jesus. So I would say, on whole, if you examine the Kanye West album, and if you examine the Kanye West walk, calling himself God, claiming to be Jesus, and merchandising. I also didn't include in there, because I didn't know until recently, that these Sunday services that he's conducting, he does these old-fashioned Sunday church services things. Genevieve pointed that out. He's charging, I think it's either $50 a head or $90. It might be $90 a head. And I did end up paying $99 to go to Hillsong United when they came to Miami and they had the thing, and I was outraged by that. But these things that Kanye West are doing on Sundays, I actually went on YouTube, and because people were saying in some of the comments on the Greg Laurie site, it's amazing how many of his supporters said, "Who are you, Greg Laurie, to tell us to shut up?" As discerning Christians, we should be able to say, we have some questions about it. We want them to be saved, but we got some issues here. And so even the masses kind of revolted, and he's got billions of followers all over the world or whatever, but even they were saying, this is kind of odd that you're criticizing Christians for even questioning whether he's a believer. But again, we kind of talked about he's charging either $50 or $90 to get into these Sunday services, which are basically concerts in the park, Genevieve.
Is it, they're naming it pop-up churches on Sundays? Is that part of the same thing?
I don't know.
That's what I heard.
But I know that he's charging, like I said, $50 to get in, and he's being hosted he was at a Baptist church in Atlanta, he was at the Forum in Los Angeles, and somewhere in New Orleans. So I watched the YouTube, entire service of New Orleans, Los Angeles, and Atlanta. None of it was Christian. It was some gospel music with some secular New Age music mixed in, and basically it seemed to me sort of like a mind control, music related event, just like Hillsong United, and that people were paying at least $50 to get in. Points out the real tragedy and the abomination of what we see in the church. And when people like you and I, discerning believers, have commented on it, pastors like Greg Laurie of Harvest Christian Fellowship / Calvary Chapel have spoken out criticizing us, and people like Joel Osteen, who is a known prosperity preacher who doesn't preach the gospel, is now inviting him to preach. One person said, look, even if he is saved, even if by the off chance that he's changed his mind about him being God and changed his mind about him being Jesus, even if he is saved, why would he be put on a platform to preach and teach people, 2 weeks after he's converted? Yeah. Like in the Bible, it seems like you were told to sit down, study the word humbly, and be under the tutelage of a pastor or an elder. And then, over the years, you pay your dues, and then maybe you can start teaching, but you wouldn't start out teaching. I've seen that, the most damning praise is the endorsements, not only Joel Osteen and Greg Laurie endorsing, but that stalwart champion of the Christian faith, Brad Pitt, has endorsed him. Brad Pitt, he the ex-husband of Jennifer Aniston, the star of stage and screen, Hollywood movie star guy, who is now, I guess, in an estranged relationship with Angelina Jolie, who drinks her brother's blood and is into the occult and all kinds of stuff. Brad Pitt, who's been a secular humanist atheist pretty much all his career in Hollywood, has now become the voice of endorsing which Christian pastors. This is great. There's no question that he's a sincere and valid Christian. Brad Pitt says he has endorsed him as a legitimate Christian, and he's actually, preaching the Christian. But Brad Pitt, star of stage and screen, who doesn't even believe in God, has now become the voice of endorsement for Christianity. So again, it's a segue and an aside, but I'm telling you guys, if you look, watch, and listen, you will see that we are in the days of apostasy. The apostasy, the departure of the vast majority of what we call mainline Christianity, has now departed to something different than what Paul and Peter and James and John taught and wrote in the Word of God. And so that segues in perfectly, and it's great. We follow up 2 weeks of exposing Halloween as the satanic holiday, blood sacrifice ritual that it is. Any of you guys catch the news about the Mormon family? Really interesting. The blonde-haired, blue-eyed Mormons from Utah moved to Mexico 10 years ago to apparently recruit new members into the Mormon cultic pseudo-Christian false church. And, they were slaughtered, an entire family, like a woman, her 3 kids.
Yeah, 3 women and 5 kids, I think.
No men, just
Yeah.
children. And one 14-year-old boy survived the onslaught and walked 14 miles to get help. You know, it's interesting. All blonde hair, blue eyed, very Nordic, Scotch, Gaelic, or at the very least, sort of the sort of Nordic Scandinavian look. Supposedly, as they're shopping it on the news, oh well, one rival gang mistook them for like members of another rival. I'm like, wait a minute, which drug cartel gangs in Mexico are made up of all blonde-haired, blue-eyed, little children and women? You know, they're running. No, I think, you know, Mexico has become so ensconced and steeped in ritualistic satanic worship. The drug dealers, the cartels, just like the Italian mob back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s in Chicago, New York City, and so on and so forth, that La Cosa Nostra thing is really a form of Satanism disguised as gang warfare. What we see in these Mexican and Colombian drug cartels is not just violence, but a satanic ritualized form of violence where it's just unheard of. It's one thing to get into a gunfight with somebody when you're fighting over drug territory of a certain city block or a town or something, but these types of ritualized killings where you kill men, women, and children, but there were no men, so you kill all the women and children. I don't believe that was a drug gang mistaking them for members of another drug gang. I think they all knew who these people were. And with the Day of the Dead following up after Halloween, Day of the Dead being November 1st and 2nd, where, you know, All's Eve or All Saints Day on November 1st, and then, you know, the Day of the Dead celebrated by the Mexicans, I think, on November 2nd or whatever. This was suspiciously close to the time where death is glorified. Remember, we talked about the Wicker Man sacrifice where you had to kill animals, and if you really wanted to make your crops grow, you killed people too. So I think that probably that's some kind of relation to our Halloween
You
season.
burn them up just as they did these people.
Right, they shot them and then, you know, set the cars. And it just seemed a little strange. It's one thing to shoot somebody, oops, I shot the wrong person.
Yeah.
But then you set the cars on fire. And as Ben points out, yeah, when the kid came back with help and help finally came, they found the baby's skull was sitting in the car because all the flesh had been burned off the body. The skin, the fat, the hair, everything was gone. It was just a skull. And remember, Day of the Dead celebrations, the absolute centerpiece, the way a pumpkin, you know, or more specifically, a jack-o'-lantern, a pumpkin that's carved and hollowed out with a face on, is the symbol of Halloween. The symbol of the, you know, Latin American, particularly Mexican Day of the Dead is what? A skull. For absolute certain. So I don't know, Ben, if that's a coincidence. I don't think there are any coincidences in the Bible, but that's a good point. I'm glad you pointed that out. They burned them after killing them. And when help came, they found their bones whitening in the sun, including a human skull of a baby.
Wow.
Now, why on earth? What would possess a grown man with assault-style weapons to shoot an infant who doesn't even walk yet, a toddler? What would possess you? Oh, I don't know, it looks like, you know, informant for the drug cartel. All right, well, just to be safe, let me shoot him.
Yeah.
And then burn him to a crisp. No, I think that was a satanic ritual to glorify the god of Halloween and the god of Samhain and the god of the Day of the Dead, which is Satan dressed in the drag, or they call him Samhain or the Green Man or Sununos or whatever. We talked about that. So, all right, so yeah, that was a sad bit. But we're living in a time when the things that we read about in the book of Revelation are beginning to come to pass. And so tonight we're going to finish up, you know, if I can stop doing all my asides, we're going to finish up our three-part series on the Antichrist, the prince that shall come. And so the last time we were here, 3 weeks ago, when we finished part 2, we had just gone through Revelation chapter 17 and 18, and I tried to make the argument that it was my opinion that the reference in Revelation 17 and 18 to Mystery Babylon was to not only a woman, it's really Satan dressed in drag, a woman, you know, Revelation 17 talks about a woman rides the beast. It's the Mystery Babylon system in the form of a woman, which is the goddess-based worship system where women are exalted and, you know, the queen of heaven is a goddess figure that gives birth to the human race. You know, she makes women fertile so they can have babies. She makes the farmers, you know, fields fertile so the crops can grow. This is the goddess Semiramis, the wife of Nimrod, way back in ancient Babylon. But also in Revelation 17 and 18, Babylon is also looked upon and described as a city. And remember, Dave Hunt wrote the excellent book, A Woman Rides the Beast, and I showed you that book last time we were here. I would suggest everybody get that book. It's about 550 pages long. But A Woman Rides the Beast by Dave Hunt, available from the BereanCall.org. Describes or characterizes this mystery Babylon harlot as a city. And he says the city is Rome, which is the headquarters of the Vatican and the Roman Catholic harlot church system. He says, the woman is drunk with the blood of the saints. Certainly that would apply to the Catholic Church, because we know that throughout the Middle Ages and prior to that even, the Albigenses, the Waldenses, the Huguenots, the Hussites, all of the evangelical fundamentalist Christians like us, who weren't part of any particularized denomination, but also were not part of the Roman Catholic state church system, were persecuted by the Roman state church system, which insisted that Christianity should be universalized, that is to say Catholic, so that only one church existed. It would be the Catholic Church of Rome, ruled over by a king called the Pope. And so any biblical Christian who read the Bible said that's not in the Bible, that we already have a king, Jesus. No, I'm Vicarius Christi. I'm the replacement for Jesus until the end of times. So you'll accord me the same worship and respect that you accord Jesus. The Waldenses, the Hussites, the Albigenses, they couldn't countenance that, so they refused, and they were being put to death. So they had to flee to the mountains of Switzerland and France and hide out in the mountains and hope that they didn't get caught. And God eventually brought an end to the stranglehold of the Roman Catholic Church over all of Europe and most of westernized world, and he used a number of different individuals to do that. I believe Erasmus was one person, and then we had Martin Luther, who was a sort of a disgruntled Catholic priest who, nailed his 95 theses on the doors of the Wittenberg Chapel, Cathedral, whatever, and we had the sort of Reformation, the protest against Roman Catholicism. And Martin Luther and John Calvin, I have reason to believe that they weren't actually biblical fundamentalist born-again Christians. I don't expect to see them in heaven, but God certainly used them mightily to, kick the leg out from under the Roman Catholic three-legged stool so that it would tip over, and Christians who were being put to death could live on, at least for a while. So, all right, so Dave Hunt says it's Rome, but Joe Chambers says no. The city that is referred to as the Mystery Babylon is actually the city in Iraq. The city Babylon in Iraq that used to actually exist. And so there we have it. We have it on our map here. Modern day Iraq and ancient Babylon and Babylonia. Here it is. The Tower of Babel was located right here in this city, right on the banks of the Euphrates River. And over time now it's become Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia. In biblical times, especially the Old Testament, it was Sheba was the Arabian desert, you had Sumer, Mesopotamia was the general neighborhood, and Babylonia was the general province in which the city of Babylon existed. And so Joe Chambers says that city referred to in Revelation 17 and 18 is the city of Babylon. Chuck Missler says it's both. They're both right. That he believes, and I think this probably makes sense, that the Mystery Babylon system that the Antichrist will actually use to unite the world together in a false form of worship to draw them away from the true form of worship of Jesus Christ and the God of the Bible, this false religious system will be originally, Chuck Missler suggests, set up in Rome, on the Vatican, the city built on 7 hills, the city drunk with the blood of the saints. Catholic Church was drunk with the blood of the saints, meaning Christians that were killed. Now, you can't say the city of Babylon in Iraq is drunk with the blood of the saints, because there weren't any saints that were followers of Jesus Christ at the time of ancient Babylon or at the time of Neo-Babylon. So that wouldn't apply to ancient Babylon. But if ancient Babylon is resurrected or renewed later, which is what Chuck Missler says he thinks will happen, that the centroid of power will shift away from the Vatican and from Rome when something happens. Maybe, the Vatican is blown up or something or whatever. Antichrist takes over the Roman Catholic Church, that one world religious system, and eventually moves his operation eastward towards Baghdad. And that's eventually where he'll set it up in Babylon, ancient Babylon in Iraq, back on the Euphrates River. That's what Joe Chambers believes, and that's why he says that verse in Micah 5, I think it is, that says, when the Assyrian shall come into our land. Those verses referring to the Assyrian from Micah clearly sounds very similar to a powerful entity that is elsewhere characterized or understood to be the Antichrist. So Assyria is actually the area in which ancient Babylon is located. So Joe Chambers says, the Antichrist is going to come out of the ancient city of Babylon and invade Israel. And so that will literally fulfill that prophecy in Micah that says, when the Assyrian shall come into our land. So to that extent, the Antichrist doesn't necessarily have to be, Turkish or an Arab. He could be from any part of the old Roman Empire, but if his headquarters is now based in what was ancient Assyria, and then he invades Israel from there as opposed to from Rome, then that could work. And it doesn't tie the Antichrist down to any one ethnicity. It doesn't have to be Italian or Roman necessarily. It doesn't have to be an Arab necessarily. It doesn't have to be, from, the city or the nation of Syria. So again, that's another way of looking at it. It's a city, Rome and ancient Babylon in Iraq rebuilt. It's also the goddess-based worship system, and it's the false religious system that purports to be Christianity, but really is not Christianity. So, again, Mystery Babylon, Satan dressed in drag, the goddess-based worship system is a woman, a city, and a false church system. So I made a couple of charts that would help us kind of go through that. One of them fell down, and the Bible says truth has fallen in the streets, and certainly it has. So here's my dual, super sophisticated, high-tech Mystery Babylon Bible prophecy chart. Now that I find my super sophisticated pointer, I can talk about it. And I had it a second ago, but I don't know what I did with it. Here it is.
Of course.
Right in your pocket. So, but gee, I don't think I gave you guys the opening prayer. We're going to jump into our charts, but let's just give accordance to the Lord. Steve, you want to do us the honors?
Lord God, we thank you. Thank you again for this little house church, Lord, an opportunity for us to gather tonight. Study the Word, and Lord, have a little fellowship and understand just some of the things that you need to impart to us to go out and kind of warn the friends and family of the judgment to come and how, Antichrist being revealed, apostasy in the church will be those things that will come before that. Lord, pray that we have ears to hear and be doers of the word that you give us, Lord. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
All right. So, just when you think you got it all set up, this stuff starts falling apart. Okay, so let's see if we can take a look side by side view here. Hopefully I'll make this fit. Okay, so the chart we looked at last time, Mystery Babylon is a religious system. All right, I suggested that if we go all the way back, Mystery Babylon starts in the Garden of Eden at the fall, which is where Halloween, by the way, started. It's really important. Genesis is really important, more than just teaching the difference between evolution and creation. It's foundational for pretty much everything that's important in the Bible. 4000 BC, Adam was created by God from the dust of the ground. God breathed into Adam's body and made it become a living soul. The fall occurs in Genesis chapter 3. Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 6 is where Lucifer appears as the form of the serpent, and he seduces the mother of the human race, Eve, who was the wife of Adam, into pursuing goddesshood by way of the use of occultic knowledge. That is to say, hidden knowledge that she would obtain from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Occult literally means what?
Hidden.
Hidden. It doesn't mean spooky, scary Halloween. Occult, which is associated with Halloween and spooky and scary and all that, really just means hidden knowledge. It's knowledge that's hidden from you. So occult means right out of view. That's where we get secret societies from. That's how you know Freemasonry is occultism, just disguised in a bright Luciferian disguise. So, goddesshood is first pursued by Eve, who I would suggest to you is the first Wiccan, the first witch, the first woman who pursued goddesshood or deity through the use of hidden knowledge. The Bible says she saw that the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was desirable to make one wise. Wiccan means wise one. When you look at the ancient English etymology, the term Wiccan is really just another way of saying wise one. So you go from Adam to Noah. Noah was the guy who God found to be a righteous man, but in addition to that, he was perfect in his generations, which meant what? That his, can you tell us?
Genes were not defiled.
Yeah, and when Steve said, he's not talking about Levi's versus, the skinny designer ones I have on today. He's talking about his DNA had not been contaminated because his grandmother or his mother or his great-grandmother was not a Nephilim bride, meaning the angels that came down and cohabited with women on earth created a hybrid race of supermen that were worshipped as like godlike figures. Atlas, Thor, Zeus, Thor, all those guys. The Nephilim. Noah didn't have that problem. God had to send the worldwide flood to wipe out the genetic gene line of the hybridized super metahumans who were threatening to overtake the Adamic humans, in which case, if that had happened, the Messiah couldn't come to save the world, which was predicted in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, because there wouldn't be any humans left. There wouldn't be any Adamic humans on the earth. They would all be Nephilim, humanoids. So God sent the flood to wipe out the Nephilim and preserve the human race and human DNA through Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. These three sons were the ones who repopulated the earth. Noah had a son named Ham, who had a son named Cush, who had a son named Nimrod. So you got Noah. So there's his, the dad of Nimrod was Cush, granddad was Ham, great-granddad was Noah. So Nimrod, who was also, after he had changed, modified his DNA through a sexual occultic ritual into a Superman or a Nephilim, became known by some as Gilgamesh, the God-man. He was also known historically as Sargon, referred to as the God-man Marduk, also Bel and Anu, which are types of Satan, were really invested in this man who actually was physically alive and lived on the earth for a time. And we talked about how he may have been killed by Shem, the son of Noah, because of his wickedness. But about 1800 BC, Nimrod married his wife Semiramis, who was also known as the Queen of Heaven, Virgin Mother, Earth Goddess. From that we get the modern day iterations, or the ancient European iterations, Gaia, what the ancient Europeans referred to, or the Egyptians referred to her as Isis, the Phoenicians referred to as Ishtar, the Hittites referred to as Ashtaroth. This goddess entity was really the wife of Nimrod, a real person, Semiramis, but after she died, the myth of her being a goddess, the Queen of Heaven, was used by Satan to promote a new not Christian, because we didn't have Christianity yet, but a counter belief to the biblical God belief. So the son of Nimrod and Semiramis, who was that? Tammuz. Tammuz was their son. I believe, based on the things I've read, that it was an illegitimate child she had with the pool boy. After Nimrod had died, she couldn't tell the followers of Nimrod in Babylon that, because they worshipped him as a god, and he had been killed violently. And she created the mythos that, no, he's been resurrected as the sun in the sky. And he shot a beam of sunlight down from the sky, and it entered into my cervix and made me pregnant. And look, I'm pregnant today. How else would I have gotten pregnant? And they're like, oh my gosh, it's a miracle. Your child is a God-man because he's born of a virgin. No man has touched Semiramis, which wasn't true. So she gives birth to the son Tammuz, who is a counterfeit of the virgin birth of Jesus Christ. And so Tammuz is the Superman, who's going to inherit the throne of Babylon. So what does Semiramis do? She marries her son so that she can continue to be the queen. She doesn't want him to go off and find some cute girl at the high school prom and then marry her, and then she becomes the queen of Babylon. So his mom married. So Semiramis marries her son Tammuz, but she justified it by saying, no, Tammuz, he's my son physically, but he's really spiritually the reincarnated form of my husband Nimrod, the sun god king who had died. So you again have the counterfeit of the gospel story, that what? God is manifested in human physical form. In this case, in the form of Tammuz, Nimrod, the sun god king, is resurrected or reincarnated, reborn in the form of Tammuz. Later, the Egyptians changed the name from Tammuz to Horus. The Greeks called him Apollo. Others called him Baal. Others called him Ninus. He is a type of the Antichrist. He is a physical, genetic, actual entity who is supposedly indwelt by the spirit of his father, who was the sun god king, who was Satan counterfeiting Lucifer, the angel of light, pretending to be God. So, at about 1500 BC, Israel, because of kings like Solomon, who fell in love with beautiful girls who weren't Jewish and decided to have them as wives and as concubines, so he had all these women, and Solomon, who was the wisest man in the world, who was allowed to build the temple of God in Jerusalem, became seduced by his foreign non-Jewish wives who were worshiping Semiramis and Nimrod through their various names and titles. And so Ashtaroth worship was really Semiramis worship. Ashtaroth worship would require human blood sacrifice, as was the worship of Baal, which was a type of ritualized sex cult where you would have sex with the priests of Baal, and the Baalim, the priests of Baal, would cut their genitals off to show their dedication and devotion to the Queen of Heaven, the sky goddess, and you would sacrifice your kids. This type of wickedness sort of inculcated and syncretized itself and invaded the nation of Israel through people like King Solomon, who married foreign women and who allowed this wickedness to become part of Israel. We read about, in Zechariah saying, have you looked in the temple? Well, they turned their backs to the temple of God, and they bake cakes for the Queen of Heaven, and they weep for Tammuz in the temple of God in Israel. And so that didn't happen overnight, but it happened over time. And even the people of God, who God had called out from the Gentiles himself and supernaturally kept alive, eventually turned to worshiping the Queen of Heaven, and eventually turned to worshiping her son, the dying and resurrected sun god king in human form, Tammuz, who was a type of the Antichrist. And so then we have about 1,500 years later, the real Jesus Christ comes to earth. He's manifest, born of a virgin in about 4 BC, fulfilling all the prophecies that had been mimicked by Satan with the mythos of Babylon. So you have the myth of Babylon versus the gospel of Jesus Christ. Again, to synopsize, Mystery Babylon counterfeits Christianity in the biblical story that begins in Genesis in the Old Testament and leads all the way through to Luke chapter 1 and 2, where Jesus is born in the New Testament. Okay, what do you have? One, a dying and resurrected sun god king. That would be Nimrod, who comes back in the form of his son Tammuz, who is, again, a type of the Antichrist. Secondly, you have a virgin queen of heaven, who's also the Earth Mother goddess. She makes crops grow, she makes women fertile, and then eventually you have, finally, the third leg of this three-legged Babylonian apostate stool is the virgin-born sun god prince, or the son of the sun god resurrected king. You have that in ancient Babylonian paganism, but you also have that in the Bible. It was Satan trying to counterfeit the gospel of Jesus Christ that we see in Luke chapter 1 and Luke chapter 2. And so eventually this mystery Babylon system becomes Druidism, which we looked at extensively the last 2 weeks in our Satanic Roots of Halloween. The Druids were Celtic priests of a blood cult who required human blood sacrifice to make the gods who supposedly lived in rocks and trees, really just Satan in disguise, make them happy so your crops will grow. Wicca, witchcraft, Satanism, all comes forward from this Mystery Babylon counterfeit system. And it becomes Mystery Babylon. Why? Because even the Romans said this is too barbaric. The Druids are killing babies and sacrificing them to rocks in the wood. We can't have that. So it had to go underground, and it became part of the Roman state church system. The Catholic priests, who were impressed by the Druid priests and the fact that the Druid priests actually had real supernatural powers. Why? Because they were practicing black magic. Black magic is real. It isn't make-believe. It isn't for children. It's a real form of satanic worship. If you give Satan enough worship and interaction and access to your life, he'll give you the desires of your heart. There'll be temporary desires, but he'll give them to you. Black magic. So the Catholic priests wanted the power that the Druid priests had. So ancient Babylonian Celtic Druidism syncretized itself secretly into the Roman Catholic priesthood. And that's why you have so many of the Roman Catholic strange religious liturgical ceremonies that track perfectly with ancient Babylonian rituals at the time of the Tower of Babel and Nimrod. And those are laid out very well in a book called The Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop.
Yep.
And I think we have a copy of that. Might have that on my little Bible prophecy shelf. I know I got it somewhere. Might not be right here. But yeah, The Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop. I would recommend you guys take a look at that and read that in conjunction with Dave Hunt's, A Woman Rides the Beast. So that's what you have. So we've got Mystery Babylon. Originally, ancient Celtic Druidism is a form of a more recent iteration of the ancient Tower of Babel, Babylonian, paganism of Nimrod, sort of came to the fore in the form of the Celtic Druids, who the Indo-European people started out maybe in the Caucasus Mountains, India, and then moved into Europe and became, an ethnic group that dominated Europe, particularly Scotland, Ireland, and parts of Europe, and eventually made its way into the United States when the Irish potato famine brought Halloween to the United States of America. Okay, so Druidism, Wicca, witchcraft goes into hiding and goes into the Catholic priesthood because the Catholic priests wanted the power of the Druid Celtic priests. And so now you have what? The New Age movement, Eastern Mysticism, Hinduism, Buddhism, so on and so forth, Islam, Freemasonry, Roman Catholicism, Mormonism, Masons, and the Illuminati. All are different iterations of the same ancient Babylonian mystery cult. And now, my other chart system, I made another chart that we used outdoors a few years ago. So, the Mystery Babylon religious system broken down into, again, ironically, 13 different points, which is kind of the same thing we had with our satanic roots of Halloween. And, 13 is the real high holy number for Satanism. And so, I think it's, more of a biblical numbers thing than it is a coincidence. Mystery Babylon religious system, looking, this is my graph chart that gives you, schematics so you can see the people involved. Here are the concepts or the people groups involved. 1, Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz create the Tower of Babel around 1800 BC. You get about 600 years later, that Mystery Babylon system that starts out at the Tower of Babel in ancient Babylon, now 6 centuries later, begins to move into a new people group, a new part. So you go from, here we are with our timeline Middle Eastern chart. Oh, it's great how kind of just jerry-rig stuff in there, man. So you got, here's Babylon, ancient Babylon here. It eventually works its way, boom, over here to Egypt. It goes from here all the way westward to Egypt. And when it gets to Egypt, they change the names from Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. The god-man, sun-god-king, his wife, the queen of heaven, the goddess Semiramis, and their supernatural virgin-born god-man, sun prince, Tammuz, is changed to the names Osiris, Isis, and Horus in Egypt. That's about 600 years later. Then you go another 600 years later, and then you have the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The Babylonian Empire led by King who, Ben?
Nebuchadnezzar.
Right. Nebuchadnezzar is the king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire that is written about in the book of Daniel, where Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are taken captive and become leaders, and that's the Neo or New Babylon. The ancient Babylon is Nimrod and Semiramis, Tower of Babel, centuries earlier. But under the Babylonian Empire of Nebuchadnezzar in about 606 BC, we have the Mystery Babylon system syncretized in there, so that the Neo-Babylonian people are also worshiping these gods. And then from that point on, about 3 centuries after that, in about 330 BC, we find that Greece now has taken over what became the Babylonian, the Medo-Persian Empire. The Babylonians were overrun by the Medes and the Persians, formed a alliance based upon a marriage, and they took over Babylon. The head of gold in Daniel's metallic man imagery, that head of gold, goodness forbid, look what we have. We have our old friend, the metallic man from Nebuchadnezzar's dream. The head of gold, Babylon, the breast of silver, the second most powerful nation state ever, Medo-Persia, and then you have the hips of brass, which is the Grecian Empire. And so that's where we're at, the Grecian Empire. They changed the names of Nimrod, Semiramis, Tammuz, who the Egyptians called Osiris, Isis, and Horus. They changed it to Zeus, Artemis/Diana, and Apollo. So Apollo is sort of the Antichrist figure, the Horus figure, the Tammuz figure. And then when Greece was according to our, incredible, Daniel chapter 2 metallic man dream, who was the next nation state that supplants the Grecian Empire, the hips of brass, on the metallic man? Rome, which is depicted as legs of iron. And you have 2 legs. Why? Because Rome eventually divided from the original Western Empire based in the city of Rome in modern-day Italy, and it moved eastward to Byzantium, which was renamed Constantinople after Constantine, their great king or whatever. So the Roman Empire comes next, the legs of iron. And when it gets to Rome, they change the name from Zeus, that the Greeks called him, to Jupiter. So Nimrod becomes Osiris, and who then becomes Zeus, who then in Latin becomes Jupiter, and Semiramis becomes Isis in Egyptian, and Artemis, Diana to the Grecians, and Venus, the goddess of love, really the goddess of sexuality, to the Romans. And again, Apollo, he's referred to by various other names by the Romans. So then later we come apart, point 6 on our outline of 13 points of Mystery Babylon syncretizing itself into the world. The Roman Empire eventually accepts the idea or concept that Caesar is God. That's from about 4 BC, about the time of the birth of Jesus Christ, to about 400 AD. You had the Roman Empire becoming the Caesar is God thing. Caesar at first was just a political leader, and then he became a leader who, like the Pope in Rome today, who is now really the modern day iteration of the ancient Caesar is God. He became this flawless figure that you had to basically worship as God. You could have other gods, but you'd have to say, no, Caesar is God as well, and he's the chief god. Then when we get to point 7, the Roman Catholic Church now becomes manifested out of what was formerly the old Roman Empire, when Constantine in 325 AD has this vision, and he says, oh, I saw a red cross in the sky, and so now I'm a Christian. So he then makes Christianity, which existed in Rome because Paul and Peter and others, but primarily Paul, went to Rome. Paul had been basically decapitated in Rome after preaching the gospel to Caesar's household and converted people to Jesus Christ. So there was a church in Rome that continued to grow after Peter was killed, after Paul was killed first, and then Peter a few years later was crucified outside the city of Rome. And so the 2 top guys in the church were dead, but because God wanted this thing to grow, the church was fertilized by the blood of the saints. And the Roman church continued to grow and prosper. Eventually, in 325 AD, when Rome was so sick and tired and threatened by these people who called themselves Christians, who refused to bow the knee to the Caesar as God, they were cutting their heads off, throwing them to the lions, dipping them in paraffin wax, and making them human candles for all kinds of sadistic, ritualized killing sessions. Again, remember, I would submit it to you guys that the Caesars in Rome were really, the corollaries to the ancient Druidic Celtic people. And even though initially Julius Caesar, remember, in 47 AD in the Gallic Wars, he wrote about the Gallic Wars, he was horrified by the things that the Druid priests were doing, and that's why Druidism had to go underground into the Roman culture. But eventually, when 325 came along, the popes, Freudian slip there, the Caesars, who eventually became the popes, had become so depraved and had so convinced themselves that they were God men, that they could decide who lived and died. They were doing things just like the Celtic priests were doing back in ancient Babylon. They were killing people for sport. And so that was the case in about 325 AD. But when Constantine had this supernatural vision in the sky, Satan, I believe, gave him a vision to counterfeit him into thinking what? He had become a Christian. Is that not the same thing we're seeing right now with Kanye West? Is that not the very same thing we're seeing with Justin Bieber, who also now is supposedly a born-again Christian and is hooked up with the Hillsong United Church, which was founded by a guy who is now dead, but a convicted pedophile in Australia, and his son is now the guy I told you hit me up for $1,000 cash over at Calvary Chapel, Miami Beach, and who was obsessively staring at little Bella. He said, God, you have such pretty eyes, little girl. 8-year-old girl, was like sort of like a goddaughter to me. When he came, Pastor Fountain invited him to speak at Calvary Chapel. Very charismatic guy. I didn't know that his dad was the convicted pedophilic founder of the Hillsong Church that was really a rock band in Australia and is now spread all over the world and has become part of this new age Christianity that features Justin Bieber, Selena Gomez, stars of Stage and Scream, and who has as their spokesperson Brad Pitt, who is a lifelong atheist, secular humanist, and Christ hater, who is now endorsing Kanye West, who claimed to be Jesus himself and still claims to be Jesus, and has merchandise out there where he calls him Jesus, which is kind of a combination of Kanye and Jesus, and he's making money off of it. And the church is doing nothing about it. And when people who are part of the flock says, this sounds and looks a little strange that he's being endorsed and being invited to the biggest churches in America, like Joel Osteen's church, then somebody like Greg Laurie, one of the co-founders of the Calvary Chapel movement with Chuck Smith, says, shut up. Don't say anything about him. If you don't have something nice to say about Kanye as a leader in the church, then just shut up and pray. And so what's going on here, man? When the leaders, the shepherds, who are supposed to be even more, discerning than the flock, when the flock has to tell their shepherds, I think you're making a mistake here, shepherd man. And the shepherd man says, shut up, don't tell me my job, I'm in charge here, but we pay your salary. And quite an exorbitant salary it is. He makes over $1 million a year, just like Bob Coy did. But something's wrong in the church. And what that something is the fulfillment of Bible prophecy, the apostasy, which we're going to look at it if I can get through my chart. So then, as has been pointed out, the Roman Catholic Church eventually split, right? And it split into East and West, the two legs of the metallic man, to Eastern Catholicism, which was based in Constantinople. So again, Roman Catholic Church, Emperor Constantine paganizes Rome's Christian church, and Mary, during that paganization period, is eventually promoted to the title of the Queen of Heaven, the Mother of God. Where did they get that Queen of Heaven title from? That wasn't
Semiramis.
right. There wasn't in some Catholic liturgy book in 400 BC. There was no Catholic liturgy book in 400 BC. The title that the Catholic Church eventually adopted in 300s AD, Queen of Heaven, which they attached to Mary, supposedly the Virgin Mother of Jesus, which they stole from the New Testament writings. They superimposed a title on this new Mary. The Queen of Heaven Mary is actually Semiramis from 1800 BC, the Queen of Heaven. That title, Queen of Heaven, is a pagan title. Satan dressed in drag. Okay, and so then we get on to point 8. Catholic Church splits into East and West. East is Byzantium, West is Rome. Point 9. Western civilization in the Dark Ages. Under Catholic domination, Spain, France, and the British Empire, about 1000 AD, you have Western civilization in the clutches of the wicked Church of Rome, which runs almost the whole show. You got the Albigenses, the Huguenots, Hussites, Waldenses hiding out in the Swiss Alps and in the mountains of France, and some people in Holland. But eventually, that yoke is broken. You have the Reformation period, the Protestant period, where people are protesting against the control of the Roman church system, and as other nation states were able to build up their armies, the armies of the Vatican, and the Vatican had the most powerful armies in the world at that time. They could do the Crusades, they could tell the kings of England, Spain, and France, this is what you're going to do, or we'll tell the people they can't go to heaven unless you are deposed from the throne. Do you want that? And kings came to the Pope, begging on their hands and knees, and Dave Hunt gives a very horrifically graphic story of one king who crossed the bad side of one of the popes, and they put his eyes out, and they made him crawl around in the snow, and he had to crawl on his hands and knees, blinded by the Pope, to ask and beg the Pope for forgiveness just to preserve his life. So the popes had real military power. As they began to lose military power, they had to compromise their control. But again, we know that Martin Luther and John Calvin, the popes trying to kill those guys because they were like upsetting the apple cart, which was the Roman church state system, which is very financially lucrative as well. So, okay, the Dark Ages came as a result of Catholic domination over Spain, France, British Empire, and most of Europe. And then eventually, the beginnings of what I would suggest, point 10, the New World Order. What happens? The American colonies. The American colonies from about 1400 AD through 1700 AD, Christians who lived in what we call Great Britain now, England primarily, the nation of England, wanted to be free from, and Scotland and Ireland and Wales as well, wanted to be free from the new form of Catholicism that had taken control in England. Really, the Roman Catholic Church controlled England at one time, and then King, then you mentioned Louis VIII, I think it is, Henry VIII, wanted to marry Anne Boleyn, and no, you can't get a divorce, but I like this girl better, and the Pope wouldn't grant him an annulment of his marriage, so he divorced himself from the Catholic Church and created his own Catholic Church in England. So Henry VIII said, "You're fired." No, I fired you. Yeah. No, I quit. And so you didn't fire me. I started my own church. And so the Church of England really started as a sort of more liberalized form of the Roman Catholic Church system with all kinds of paganism already invested in it. And so real born-again believers like you and I, they were called the Puritans because their life was so pure and so devoid of worldly pursuits that people said, man, they're different. We'll call them the Puritans. And that's really where, or the church, well, actually the church where I first ever spoke in a pulpit was Plymouth Brethren Church. That's the church that Dave Hunt came out of, or denomination, if you will. They actually started out in England as well. They were a type of Puritan, and they landed at Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts, and that's where they got the name, the Plymouth Brethren, because they fled England, as did most of the Puritan Christians, because when it became clear that, hey, there's gold in them dar hills, there's a new land, a new world that has all kinds of riches. Now the Illuminized, one world globalist, Luciferian Satanists that controlled the British government and the British form of Roman Catholicism known as the Church of England, they said, some of these one world globalists were already worshiping Satan and said there's going to be a new world order established through a new nation, and that new nation will be the United States of America. And they set forth to colonize the new land of America. America, by the way, is the name, sort of the Spanish version, anglicized form of the Spanish version of Queen of Heaven or Semiramis. America is how you would say it in Spanish. America is the name of the sky goddess, who's really Semiramis. It's really Mystery Babylon all over. The Queen of Heaven is America. But for whatever reasons, our founding fathers and those in power referred to and named our nation after some of the pagan gods and goddesses. If you go to Washington, D.C., you ask any really biblically literate Bible teacher, and they'll tell you, Washington, D.C. is one of the most paganized occultic cities on the face of the earth. The temples of the gods and goddesses, cities set up in pentagram form, all kinds of satanic Luciferian sigils, Freemasonry totally steeped in occultism of the European Luciferians, the Statue of Liberty sent to us by those stalwart stand-up champions of evangelical Christianity, France, and their French Revolution, where they had the one-breasted female leading the people, liberty leading the people. That's a Freemasonic symbol. That is also a symbol of Semiramis, the Queen of Heaven, taking over the nations of the earth. It's also a Freemasonic symbol when you get initiated in Freemasonry. They make you pull your shirt down and you show, expose one nipple. That's the whole thing that liberty leading the people is really Semiramis, the Queen of Heaven, leading revolt and outrage in that painting. Who painted that? Ben, you're our cultural.
Sorry, which painting?
Liberty leading the people. That was painted in what was that? That's in the Renaissance period. I forgot who it is. That's homework assignment. Find out who painted that great. It's actually an impressive looking picture. But liberty leading the people. Go to your phone and see if Genevieve can track it down. Liberty leading the people. And it's that famous painting of her with her fist raised and one breast exposed, very ample. I don't know, breast implants in those days, whatever. She was this full figure gal leading a bunch of French rapscallions. Like, let's just destroy the modern order, and from it will rise a new order. Chaos and disorder. From chaos will come a new world order. So we find that being syncretized into the new colonies. The people, and I was listening to somebody, I forgot who it was, I was like, geez, that's a good way to put it. It might have been one of the guys that answers in Genesis, who it was? It might have been Lawson, Lawson who...
oh yeah, Chuck Lawson? Or is that his name?
The Charles Lawson?
Charles Lawson,
yeah, who I know AP's wife likes him a lot. Yeah. He's the guy that was saying, he said, America... And he has that funny tennis...
Eugene Delacroix.
Yeah, Delacroix. Do you have a picture of it, Genevieve? Yes. Let's see if we can blow that up. Oh, here it is, ladies and gentlemen. See, look at my high-tech... Boy, we spare no expenses here at South Beach Gospel Ministries.
Cancel.
Oh, cancel. Okay, so there it is. There's a picture of liberty leading the people. I studied this in high school and again in college because I was an art history minor, and
I didn't know that.
I was digging it. I took the humanities class, the college prep humanities class in high school, and the art history section was fascinating, and that's where I first saw this. And I was a brand new Christian, so I noticed a lot of sort of Christian iconography. But yes, it's liberty leading the people. And who was it again? Delacroix. Delacroix. Yeah, I liked his paintings because he was a realist. His paintings were more realistic, and yeah, there it is. I remember, little kid with the gun, like, 6-year-old kid has the gun, her breasts are exposed, and again, I'm like, 16 years old in my humanities class. I hadn't really seen, breasts before, and I'm like, we're not allowed to have Playboy magazine in our house. So I was like, man, that's naked woman. Wow. And then the guy in the top hat, that's the Freemasonic top hat, guys. These are the French illuminists. These are the French, eventually, elite, who our secret society is based upon. And so, yes, that is the Queen of Heaven. That is liberty leading the people. That is America. And so the Puritans fled England to be free from the state church system of England that was steeped in French occultism elitism, and Illuminism, which is another way of saying Luciferianism, and some people now call it the Illuminati. Illuminati is a real organization that was founded. We could talk about the 1700s, how they were founded, but they existed before the 1700s, and they exist now in our secret society. So again, Western civilization, 1000 AD, New World Order, the American colonies, 1400 to 1700 AD, the colonies named after the sky goddess Semiramis, America. Then the American Revolution occurs. That's our really critical point 11 on our 13-point chart. When the American Revolution occurred, remember, it was done for and by the Illuminati, I would argue, and the Freemasons of Europe, 1776. And remember, the French were intimately involved in backing, their interests in the New World Order and the American Revolution of the colonies versus the British crown or the British king.
Oh yeah, they say without the French help, the British would have defeated the independence.
Without question. I remember we were studying the Hessians, and I was like, is that like hash? My dad used to make hash, with corned beef and hash. But no, the Hessians. Who were the Hessians? The Hessians were like French soldiers for hire. They would
Mercenaries.
pay us, we'll come fight. And they came to help us win the Revolutionary War because we paid them. And they were from France, which was steeped in Illuminism and secular humanism. The French Revolution wasn't anything like the American Revolution because the French hated God, because they had become enlightened. They were into the Renaissance period. Great architecture, liberty leading the people, a pagan goddess leading the people away from the church. They rejected the Roman Catholicism. Rome, had dominated France and done terrible things. So, understandably, the people thought of Christianity as some kind of barbaric, elite form of, mind control. But they were enlightened enough to know that knowledge and the pursuit of science and the pursuit of reason is superior to these silly religious books where popes and basically Roman Catholic kings would kill people and torture them because of silly violations of make-believe rules and a make-believe God who doesn't exist. So you had the French people who are secular humanists coming to help us win the war in the colonies over the British crown.
And don't forget Lafayette, one of Washington's favorite generals, a French general.
And the designer of the streets in Washington, D.C. There's monuments to Lafayette all throughout D.C. And I believe he had a primary role to play in helping design the setup of the streets. Having lived there, when I was going to law school, I was like, who designed the streets here? It's you go in a straight line, and then you got a circle, and then you got 3 or 4 different straight lines coming off. The reason for it is because it's part of sacred geometry. It is set up in the form of, if you look at the Capitol, where the Capitol Rotunda building and the Washington Mall, and we've already talked about the belly of Semiramis is the Capitol Rotunda, and I was surprised Pastor Lawson, he was saying, he said, America, you'll never go, when you go, after you hear this sermon, he said, you'll never look at the Washington Monument again. And he described it, as I've said in the past, that, and I didn't know he had subscribed to not my theory, but a theory that I subscribe to, that the Washington Monument is the phallic symbol of Osiris, and that the Capitol Rotunda, the dome on top of it, is the impregnated Valley of Semiramis. The sunbeam light would refract off the tip of the Washington Monument on certain occultic holidays and shoot a beam right through one of the windows in the Capitol Rotunda dome. And on certain occultic special days where stars align just right, guess what would be lit up? The interior of the dome of the Capitol Rotunda would be lit up, which shows George Washington, the founder of our country, the father of our country, doing the Baphometic as above, so below symbol, but he's not dressed in his, colonial general outfit that you normally see him outfitted in, with the long socks and the knickers and the blue jacket with the cool buttons on his side. No, he's dressed in a robe as Zeus, the god of heaven. And the name of the painting of the ceiling is the apotheosis of George Washington. Apotheosis is a fancy Greek term which means what? A man is being transmogrified. Albert likes that word, transmogrified. a man, George Washington, is being transmogrified into a god. That is the very heart of Illuminism. That is the very heart of the Illuminati. That's the very heart of Satanism, Luciferianism, that you too, through hidden knowledge, can become a god. It is the original lie in the Garden of Eden that the serpent gave to Eve. So the American Revolution, vying for the Illuminati and the Freemasons of Europe. It just so happens, and Thomas Lawson, I was glad to see when I listened to his little sermon the other day, he said, America's not a Christian country. It's a country where Christians live.
Mm-hmm.
There were real born-again believers that fled England because they wanted to be free from the state church system of England with their false, beliefs that they really had adopted in from the Roman Catholic Church system. And so, to that extent, when the opportunity was given, hey, you guys want to, at the risk of life and limb, you can be free to go to a new country and set it up. They took the chance to get on the Mayflower and those other ships that came across with the Mayflowers. What were the other two? Yeah. And they landed at Plymouth Rock, and all of that. But those people all knew that they probably had a less than 20% chance of survival. Why did they take the chance? Not because they were officials of the British government on a salary and they had, a chest full of gold that the king gave. No, they were so desperate to be free from the religious persecution of real born-again Christians in England that they were willing to risk the lives of themselves and their children, wives and kids, by going across the sea to a new land. And that's why God blessed this country so much. Not because the founding fathers, George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, who was a Satanist who killed children and did sexual blood cult rituals in his flat in London, was the founder of the Hellfire Satanic Club in England. He was an enlightened man. Intellectually, he was one of the elite. But he was depraved because intellectualism does not equal wisdom. Wisdom is the fear of God. If you've divorced the fear of God from your life, you're not wise, no matter how intellectually elite you are. And so you had the pilgrims, they called them, coming over in the Mayflower. These were real Puritan, born-again Christians who were trying to escape. God blessed this country mightily because 99% of the people that came over in those boats were real hardcore evangelical Christians. So to that extent, I agree with Lawson and Christian Pinto, who did a series on the same topic, a video series. America wasn't ever a Christian country. It was a country that was made up of almost all Christians who were actually born-again biblical Christians. It wasn't until later that when you started with the Irish potato famine in 1840, you had all of the Irish Catholics coming into the country, bringing Roman Catholicism, and you started to see Catholicism syncretized into American life. So, again, all right, American Revolution, 1776. And then 12, the United States of America is eventually founded on July 4th, 1776, which is also very close to the birth date of the newest iteration of the Illuminati. And that's why that date is actually on some of our significant documents, such as the dollar bill. You have the date not of the Revolutionary War being one, but also the date of the Illuminati sort of being re-established here in the United States, or excuse me, in Europe, put on the American dollar, which shows you that the guys who were running the show in the American Revolution were really just British elitists who came over to make America the fulfillment of their prophecy of a new world order arising out of the ashes of the former British Empire. But God had other plans because so many of his people were living here in the United States of America. That's why America became the greatest nation in the history of the world in terms of military might, economic might, in terms of gross national product, in terms of resources, in terms of crops, in terms of farming, in terms of industrialization. And, when the automobile was built, we became the kings of the world. The 20th century was referred to as the American century because God blessed us so much, because so many of the people here were real followers of Jesus. Okay, so point 13, USA, the modern era. Christian Protestant churches became paganized and infected with Babylonian religion. How? I would suggest to you when Catholicism worked its way into the country. Catholicism was outlawed in America once upon a time, but eventually it worked its way in. And with that, the pseudo-Christianity of the Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Seventh-day Adventists, all founded right here in the United States of America, all within a few years of one another in the 1800s, all about the same time that in England, Charles Darwin was reviving interest and popular of the theory of evolution, which wasn't created by Charles Darwin. Darwin is not the father of evolution, no, not at all. Charles Lyell, who was a lawyer, was promoting that stuff, and Darwin was just used as a mouthpiece because he had gone to Oxford and he had gotten a degree in theology to become an Anglican priest, and he was disgruntled and unhappy. And that's what you did then when you go to an Ivy League school here or there was Oxford and Cambridge was their Ivy League. At that time, if you didn't become like a doctor or a lawyer, you became an Anglican priest. That was like this big social thing. So you would go off to school and pursue one of those pursuits, and that's what he got his degree in, theology. He didn't have a degree in biology or in any study of science, and most people don't realize that Darwin is not a scientist, even though he purported to be one. He didn't have any academic credentials that would allow him to take that claim or that title. He was a theologian, but he hated God and was angry at him about certain things that had happened in his family, and he turned against God and tried to destroy him. So Lyell and the others who were the secular humanists in England used Darwin because he came from an influential family and promoted him and puffed his stuff. And when he wrote a book that contained information that he didn't originate, all that stuff was originated years before him. He popularized it and became the father of evolution. But in reality, he was just a puppet of the Illuminati system. So, but here in the United States of America, goodness forbid, in this Christian country, Satan comes in with the pagans that came from Europe and creates a pseudo-Christian form of Christianity. Again, the Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists, and eventually giving way to the purpose-driven emergent church system, the TBN, prosperity gospel, the New Age, feminism, homosexuality. All of that grew up from the 1800s to the present day. And the present day that we're living in now, we're at the closing stage of 2019. I'm glad this year is over. Man, I'm hoping it'll be the last one before Jesus comes back. But here we are at the concluding stages of 2019, and we see apostasy is alive and well. We are much sicker as a nation now, even though we are economically more advanced and, in terms of modernism, we're more modern than at the time the Founding Fathers came here and the Puritans came over in the Mayflower, but we are much worse off spiritually. We were 99.99% evangelical born-again Christians when America was founded by the Pilgrims, with just that very, very small fraction of a percentage of a point being the Illuminati elite sent over from Great Britain, who was in league with the French secular humanists, who gave us our, the phallus of Semiramis came from France, as well as Lady Liberty in the New York Harbor, at the cusp of the Hudson River, where it meets the East River in New York City. That, again, that's Semiramis, with her crown of light radiating from her head, showing that she's deity. And the torch is symbolic of the enlightenment of the Illuminati, divine Luciferianism. And so, again, you got the Founding Fathers, pagans, and deists, and Freemasons, but all of the people are evangelical Christians. So when you got a democratic system, you got to play ball, because they can vote you in and out of office. So you got to pretend to be something that you're not. And now, as they've gained control primarily of the media centers of New York City and Los Angeles, California, specifically Hollywood. Hollywood is extremely important in the establishment of Luciferianism here in the United States of America. Why? Because it is the major center of propaganda. New York City, in the early days of television, was the centerpiece of information going through television airwaves to the people, the masses. When TV sets got put in homes in the Midwest, you could start controlling, think of the people in Middle America, which we've always, kind of jokingly, pridefully maybe a little bit, referred to ourselves as the heartland of America, because that's where all the farming was. We're God's country, because that's where real people that work with their hands, middle class was prosperous in the Middle West. And the Eastern establishment, was in New York City and Boston and places like that, those people. But they got Hollywood and created it to create a mind control system. So through the television set, primarily in the 1950s, they could begin to change the zeitgeist or the philosophical underpinnings of the country. And as a result of that, we see that Christianity, real biblical Christianity, slowly became undone. 1950s, we were a very, very God-centered, God-fearing country. People went to Sunday school, people went to church on Sundays. Shops were closed in the 1950s. They didn't care what your particular feelings were. Everybody respected that Christianity was the religion of our country and Sunday was the day of worship, and that founding fathers, it's in the Constitution, God's mentioned we're supposed to be doing this. But as we got out of the 50s into the 60s, and the Tavistock Institute and the mind controllers from Great Britain invaded our country with drugs, sex, and rock and roll. And that's not just a meme or some type of cliche phrase. That's literally, they used the Beatles, they used the Rolling Stones, they used all of these strange hippie-fied rock and roll bands from England to come to the United States. They talk about Jerry Lee Lewis as the father of rock and roll, or Elvis Presley, but they sent these weird bands that nobody had ever even heard of, that weren't even that successful in England, and they sent them to the United States of America, and all of a sudden they became bigger than, as the Beatles said, we're bigger than Jesus Christ. And they sent with it drugs. And Adorno, the mathematician who did the music for the Beatles, was part of, people had found out, the Tavistock Institute was kind of a mind control center based in London, and they used the beats of the music called rock and roll to control the thinking and the mindset and to the promotion of unbiblical values like free sex and the use of drugs. And drugs, pharmakeia, is the door that opens the path to interaction with demonic entities. And so Antichrist, of course, will be using that. So, just going through the chart is the whole teaching. So that's where we're at with modern day times. So to summarize, we talked about Mystery Babylon, woman, a city, and a false religious system. Now let's take a look real quick. Let's jump into scriptures. Steve, if you would, let's have, Ben, because Steve's going to do 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 for you, Steve. Cue 2 Thessalonians. Ben, go to Matthew 24 if you would for us. As a matter of fact, while you're doing that, I will just summarize that just because I talk too much and I take too much time. What Jesus is saying in Matthew 24 is Daniel 7, Ben. Go to Daniel 7 and read 21 and 22 when you get there. I'm sorry to do that to you. Jesus is saying in Matthew 24, he's basically giving a press briefing to his insider disciples, and he's giving a prediction of a time called the Great Tribulation where no flesh will survive. And he says, Matthew 24, verse 15, he says, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, then let them that live in Judea flee to the mountains, let him in the house not come back and get his clothes. And he says, for then shall be such great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days were shortened, no flesh will be saved. And so he said, what spoken of by Daniel the prophet, what's he talking about? The abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Daniel chapter 7, verse 21 and 22.
I beheld, and the same horde made war with same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Okay,
so now, which version is that? Which one do you have? Which version do you have? King James? Yeah, okay, so, so Antichrist is being referred to here. I beheld the same horn, made war with the saints, and prevailed against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and a judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came for the saints to occupy the kingdom. That's talking about the Antichrist. Daniel is making reference to this entity, Antichrist, and you see him making reference to him, Daniel chapter 2, Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 8, and Daniel chapter 9. Paul makes reference to the same period of time in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 through 12, which Steve is going to read.
Now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, and by our gathering together unto him, that ye be not soon shaken in mind, or be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter as from us, as that the day of Christ is at hand. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Remember ye not that when I was yet with you, I told you these things? And now ye know what withholdeth, that he might be revealed in his time. For the mystery of iniquity doth already work. Only he who now letteth will let, until he be taken out of the way. And then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. Even him whose coming is after the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this cause God shall send them strong delusion, that they shall believe a lie, that they all might be damned who believe not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness.
Okay, so I'm going to synopsize that for you right now. Ben, jump over to Revelation 13 for us. Okay, so what Steve just read to us is, in essence, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 is foundational. You should memorize verses 1 through 12, because that lays out the whole story here. What Steve just told us, 1, apostasia. That word departure in Greek is apostasia. And so Steve said, don't be shaken in mind, for that day shall not come until there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. Son of perdition is referring to the Antichrist. Falling away in Greek is apostasia. Apostasia has 2 different meanings. 1, there's a departure in the church, a falling away from the gospel, the truth, once delivered to the saints. What we call Christianity was determined by our belief in the Bible. It wasn't delivered to the saints several times, even though there's 40 New Testament books. It was delivered once. That's a one whole, united whole, unified whole, the New Testament. That was delivered to the saints one time, and it's only one belief. Mormonism, Catholicism, Jehovah's Witnesses is different. What Paul is saying is that before the Antichrist is revealed, there's going to be a departure from within the body that calls itself the church from true biblical foundational beliefs that make us biblical Christians to a pseudo-Christian, apostate, departed form of Christianity not based upon the writings of the Bible. That's why we have so many New Age Bible translations, Jehovah's Witnesses Bible, so that we can change the doctrine in the Bible. That's why Satan is doing the game, bit by bit. Then the other apostasia or departure, falling away first, can be translated apostasy in Greek. Apostasy in Greek literally means departure. So you get the falling away from the church from doctrine, so that the vast majority of the church, or the group of entity people that call themselves the church, don't believe the Bible anymore. And then you have a smaller group within that are really the church because they do believe the Bible. Then Paul is saying another event that is characterized by the Greek term apostasy will occur, the rapture. I think what Paul is saying is that the nominal church will, in the last days before the rise of the Antichrist, depart from the Bible as their foundational belief, or pervert the Bible into meaning that, the love of Jonathan, David for Jonathan was greater than that of any man for woman, didn't mean that they were really great friends and that they were willing to die fighting for the Lord yet. No, they were homosexuals. That's what that verse means. Homosexuality is okay now. So now you had a departure from, the Bible used to mean that homosexuality was an abomination, a sin. Now it's being reinterpreted to mean that it's okay. So you have a departure from doctrine, then you have a departure from the planet Earth, the physical remnant that still believes in the Bible. The real church is the born-again believers who also call themselves Christians, but aren't like the other people who call themselves Christians, who don't actually believed the Bible, never were born again in the Spirit, John chapter 3, verse 16, Jesus is going to take them out of the world physically. That's going to be the rapture, the departure, the apostasy, or the taking away, snatching away. Then the Antichrist will be revealed, Paul says, and then God will send a delusion to those left behind in the false church so that they can be damned because they didn't believe the real, literal Word of God when they had an opportunity to. So God will allow the Antichrist to come onto the scene using great signs and wonders, powers that he obtains from Satan himself to deceive the people. And God himself is going to be part of that and give the false apostate Christians left behind a strong delusion so that they're going to believe the lie of the Antichrist that the rapture, no, that wasn't the rapture. Satan hates the rapture. That was the UFOs taking the bad people off the planet. And the planet's much better now, but in order to protect yourself from you getting snatched by them, you better take this special chip under the skin and swear allegiance to our new world leader because he loves us. He's the man of the hour. That'll be the Antichrist. So that's what's going to happen. And so Daniel chapter 7, I'll just refer you guys to that. It makes reference, Daniel had a dream, and his dream was corollary to the metallic man dream of Nebuchadnezzar. And he said, the fourth beast was dreadful and terrible, and had great iron teeth, and it devoured things, and it was more powerful than all the beasts that came before it. And he says in verse 7 that it had 10 horns, and there came up another, a little horn, whom the first 3 horns were plucked up by the roots, and so on and so forth. He says the fourth beast was diverse from all the others and exceedingly great. And he makes reference to 10 horns that were in the head of this beast, before whom 3 fell, even that horn that had eyes, and a mouth that spoke bold things, and his look was more stout than his fellows. Again, Daniel's talking about the Antichrist and this prophetic dream that he has. Verse 21 of Daniel 7, which we just read, says, that same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them. Satan doesn't prevail against the church. The church isn't on the earth when the Antichrist is prevailing against the saints. Those are the tribulation saints, the people left behind who didn't have a chance to accept the gospel before, or who came to their senses and accepted the gospel, and as a result were willing to pay for their faith in Christ with their lives now. And so verse 22, it says, until the Ancient of Days came, until Jesus comes back at the second coming, war will be made against them. And then he says, verse 23, interestingly enough, it says, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all the kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and tread it down, and break it into pieces. Verse 24, it says, the 10 horns out of his kingdom are 10 kings, and another shall arise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue the 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, meaning the God of the Bible, and he shall wear out the saints of the Most High. He's going to kill all the people that believe in Jesus after the rapture, and think to change the times and laws. And they shall be given into his hands until a time, and times, and the dividing of a time. That Hebrew translated out into the English means 1 plus 2 plus 1/2. 1 plus 2 plus 1/2 equals 3.5. This is making reference to a 3.5-year period of time where the Antichrist will be allowed to put to death at will anybody who names the name of Jesus Christ. This is what Jesus is referring to in Matthew 24 as the Great Tribulation period, the second half of the 70th week of Daniel, the second half of the 70-year period of time, which we go to our special high-tech bulletin board here, and you see, boop, boop, there we have it. 70 weeks of Daniel just pops out of nowhere. So it's the second half, the last 3.5 years, time, and dividing of a time. 1 plus 2 plus 1/2 equals 3.5 years, also known as 1260 days. Now we see that if you fast forward, and again, 10 horns relates to 10 kings, 10 geographical regions, New World Order's government. So some people say they're regions, others say they're kings. And let's just take a look real quick before we go to our 70th week of Daniel chart and Revelation 13. Remember, I gave you the chart last week, last time we were here. The Revelation 17 and 18, or Revelation chapter 17 and book of Daniel interpretation chart. Revelation 17 makes reference to the Antichrist. Daniel chapter 2 makes reference to him. Daniel chapter 7. And again, we have basically 5 different primary interpretations of the passages we just read. The 8 kings referred to in Revelation 17. We have Mark Hitchcock and John Walbert saying the kings and kingdoms are Egypt, Assyria, Neo-Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome 1, revived Rome 2, and the final one world government of the Antichrist. You have Revelation 17:10, 7 kings, 5 have fallen. Adrian Rogers says the 5 that are fallen are Augustus, Claudius, Caligula, Tiberius, and Nero, who were Roman Caesars who had died before 96 AD when the book of Revelation was written. And then verse 6 says, one is, and the other has not yet come. As of 96 AD, the one who was Emperor Domitian, who was extant at the time of the book of Revelation. And then he says the other has not yet come. When he comes, he must continue short space. He's making reference to the Antichrist. We take that verse to mean that the Antichrist will come from out of the old Roman Empire. That's why the 2 legs become the feet, which is the revived Roman Empire. And then Chuck Missler, he gives an interpretation. He says Revelation 17:10 means that the 5 kings are Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and Greece. One is, he says, that's Rome, that was existent at the time the book of Revelation is written, and the other has not yet come. That's the revived Roman Empire, the New World Order, ruled over by the Antichrist, which is now being coalesced. And then, of course, you have the Metallic Man Dream of Grant Jeffrey. He says that the 7 that we just made reference to, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome 1, revived Rome 2 of the Antichrist, the 4 plus 1. And again, we have Daniel 7, 1 through 7, just read that. The 4 beasts that were referred to, Grant Jeffrey says that the lion is one of the heads, that's Neo-Babylon. The bear, one of the heads, Medo-Persia. The leopard has 4 heads, that's Greece, that divided out into 4 sub-kingdoms. Lysimachus, Cassandra, Seleucus, and Ptolemy divided up the Grecian Empire. So that's where you get 4 heads from. And then he says there's one last head, a terrible beast. That's the Roman Empire. But from that Roman Empire comes the little horn, the Antichrist. So, again, now we're going to look at Revelation 13. Revelation 13, 500 years fast forward, John is looking at the same vision that God gave to Daniel, who says this Antichrist is going to rule the world for a time and dividing the time, or 3.5 years. Now we see John in the book of Revelation getting the same vision from God, only he's referring to the same time period by terms of months as opposed to years. And he makes reference to 42 months as opposed to 3.5 years. But they're 42 months to 3.5 years, so they're talking about the same time frame. So Ben, if you would, read for us Revelation chapter 13 verse 1, and read right through 18, 1 through 18.
And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his seat, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads, as it were, wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. And power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, and his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints, and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds, and tongues, and nations. And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life, of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. If any man have an ear, let him hear. And that leadeth into captivity, he that leadeth into captivity, shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and faith of the saints. And I beheld another beast coming out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast that had the wound by a sword, and did live. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save that he had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that understandeth, that hath understanding, count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666.
There he got the 666, the famous, most infamous number in all of, the Bible, the number of the Antichrist. Revelation 13. Basically, John is recounting the same thing that Daniel recounted for us in Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7. He's saying that it's going to be 3.5 years as well, that the Antichrist is going to be able to rule and kill the saints of the Lord and have all of this wicked power that's going to be so bad that Jesus says in Matthew 24, there wouldn't be anybody left on earth if it went longer than the 42-month period of time. Again, John calls it 42 months. Daniel calls it 3.5 years. Again, what we're looking at is what? We're looking at the 70th week of Daniel. Here it is, 70th week of Daniel, a 7-year period of time. That final 7-year period of time, the first 69 of which went up to the crucifixion of Jesus to the day. The final 7-year period of time, or the 70th week of the 70 weeks prophecy, is divided out into two parts. The first half for 3.5 years or 42 months, and the second half for 3.5 years or 42 months. Jesus says during the second half, Antichrist will now become the abomination of desolation, meaning he will go into the temple. When he says, when you see that abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, he's talking about Daniel recording that Antichrist will go into the temple and make himself to be God. We see in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 that Paul said the same thing, so that he, as God, enters into the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 is referring to the same thing that we see in Daniel's chapter 2, 7, 8, and 9, where Antichrist goes in and makes himself out to be a God. And so when Jesus says, once that happens, then you got 3.5 years of literally hell on earth, where strange creatures are released from the bottomless pit, and pretty much everybody is dying. And if it went longer than 3.5 years, or longer than 42 months, or longer than 1,260 days, which is all the same time frame, nobody would be left alive when Jesus came back. So Jesus intervenes and comes back quickly to end it. So again, Ben is making reference to that. And again, the mark of the beast 666, again, I've said before, I think it's a biogenetic chip that you insert under the skin of the hand, which will rewrite your DNA so that you are no longer biogenetically Adamic. Your DNA nucleotidal base pairs will be rewritten, and it will be characterized as a good thing. It'll help you prevent, juvenile onset diabetes, male pattern baldness, cellulite in women. All of that will be cured with this new mark, because it's going to rewrite all of the genetic defects out of your Adamic DNA and make you a superman, a God-man, a metahuman. But it's also going to make you no longer eligible for salvation, because you no longer have the genetic fingerprint of your physical biogenetic father, the original man, Adam. The first man, the original Adam, who was replaced by what? The second man, the last Adam the Bible refers to as Jesus Christ. He died on the cross to pay for the sins of the descendants of the first man, the original Adam. The second man pays for the sins of the first man and his children. The second man, the Bible says, is the last Adam, the Lord from heaven, Jesus Christ. If you become something other than the biogenetic descendant of the first man, the original Adam, you don't have a kinsman redeemer anymore. Remember, he has to be a close blood relative to be able to atone for your loss, make up for your loss. So if you become a metahuman, a superman, you'll live out that life, but when that life is over, then you got to live in the lake of fire forever because you die in your sins. Because you don't have a kinsman redeemer. So even if you want to accept Jesus as your Savior, once you take the mark of the beast, you can't because you're no longer eligible because you're no longer fully human. And so that's what we're looking at. And so Daniel chapter 8, I'll just look at that real quickly. Daniel is again talking about this man, the Antichrist. Here he's referred to as one understanding dark sentences, and that's where we get the title, the Prince of Darkness. It says, Daniel chapter 8, verse 23, and in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences, there's that Prince of Darkness phrase, shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. What is that referring to? 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Antichrist gets his power from whom? Satan, that's right. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper in practice, and shall destroy the mighty and holy people. The followers of Jesus Christ left behind after the rapture, the Jewish people that are waiting for their Messiah after the rapture. Antichrist will make war on the Jews and upon the evangelical believers in Jesus Christ, and he will prevail against them. And it says, and through his policy, he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself. In other words, witchcraft and sorcery will be part and parcel of the reign of the Antichrist. Witchcraft also involves the term pharmakeia, drug use. We have a drug for everything. You got male pattern baldness, is a drug for that. You got erectile dysfunction, goodness forbid, and this hypersexualized environment that the United States of America has become since the middle 20th century. Now sex is everything, so you got to take a pill for that. So, you got stress? Well, we're going to legalize marijuana. Everybody can be stoned. Everybody's going to get high. Now the gateway to the fallen ones who were cut off from you when the pineal gland was shut down by God in the Garden of Eden, it's now reopened. The third eye that the Illuminati or the New Age or the New World Order is always talking about, it's the pineal gland at the front of the brain which got disconnected. It gets reconnected through the use of pharmakeia, through the use of psychotropics, LSD, ecstasy, even marijuana can create a out-of-body experience so that the fallen ones can interact with you, deceive you, and eventually destroy your soul. And it says, Antichrist, by peace he shall destroy many, and he shall also stand up against the Prince of Princes, but he shall be broken without hand. So, again, we have the prediction that eventually Antichrist will be destroyed by Jesus. But all these different passages in Daniel and Revelation are referring to the same entity, the Antichrist. And so, let's have Genevieve, I don't think you've gotten one for us yet. Actually, Steve, we'll go to you, Genevieve, Matthew 24, verse 15 for you, Genevieve, if you could. No, Genevieve, find Micah chapter 5 and 6 for me. Micah's one of the minor prophets. Steve, read for me the famous 70 weeks prophecy passage. Daniel chapter 9, read 24 through 27.
70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression, and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous time. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the Prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of war desolations are determined.
Wow, so there you have it. So you have the entire 70 weeks is laid out, and that kind of was narrated. Steve read it and worked perfectly. Tell me that my YouTube videos aren't as sophisticated as everybody else's. So, old school. So Steve he said, 70 weeks are determined. That's the whole time frame, 490 prophetic years until the kingdom of God is established on earth. But it's divided out into the first 69 weeks of years, which concludes with the crucifixion of Jesus Christ at 32 AD, 173,880 days after it was predicted to the day. And then there's a gap in that 69 weeks of years, separating it from the 70th week of Daniel, the 70th year. And that's the 2,000-year parenthetical called the church age, which will end when the apostasy becomes so great in the church that Jesus won't allow his children to suffer through it anymore, and then he raptures us out of the world with the rapture. The apostasy and departure from doctrine will trigger the removal of the real church from the world, the other apostasy, which is the departure physically from the earth, so that the world can have its worldly church, and Joel Osteen and Kanye West will be priests almighty to the Antichrist and their false Psuedo-Christianity that'll be left behind. And then Antichrist will be revealed for the final 70th week, the final 7-year period of time, divided out into 2 3.5-year periods. During the first half, Antichrist is going to use Ben read what referred to 2 beasts. The beasts are referring to the Antichrist and the false prophet. False prophet is the second beast, who is probably the Pope of Rome uniting the world together in a false Christianity and eventually convincing people that Antichrist is the Messiah. And then, once Antichrist becomes the Messiah, he gets to go into the rebuilt temple, which will happen at about the halfway point of that 70th week. That's the abomination of desolation spoken up by Daniel the prophet. Remember, in biblical times, what happened is after the temple was rebuilt, it was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, rebuilt, and eventually one of the descendants of General Seleucus, who was the founder of the Seleucid dynasty, a guy by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes, went into the rebuilt temple and slaughtered a pig on it and desecrated it. And that was like a really, really terrible mark on the zeitgeist of the Jewish people. So at the time of Jesus, they remembered that. And Jesus was making reference to that by reference as a type of abomination of desolation. But he says there's going to be a future abomination of desolation that was spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Not necessarily literally referring to Antiochus Epiphanes going into the temple and desecrating it, but that was a type of what the Antichrist would do. The real abomination is when the Antichrist, 3.5 years into the 70th week of Daniel, goes into the temple of God, as we find out in more detail in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, so that Antichrist, halfway through the 7-year period of time, 3.5 years into the 70th week of Daniel, goes into the temple of God so that he, as God, enters into the temple of God, which is rebuilt parenthetically, showing himself that he, the Antichrist, is God. That's the real abomination of desolation. Once Antichrist takes the throne in the temple of God rebuilt in Jerusalem, he doesn't need Mystery Babylon anymore. He doesn't need the Semiramis goddess-based worship system, which was used to steal men away from the worship of the God of the Bible by using the sexual appeal of a woman. Once that he becomes God, he gets rid of the Mystery Babylon goddess-based worship system, which is what you see happening in Revelation chapter 17 and 18. 17, she's on top of her game. She says, "I'm no widow. I'm the man. I'm not a widow." What does that make reference to? When she says, "I am no widow," she's basically saying that because her husband Nimrod came back in her resurrected Tammuz son, that she's no longer a widow anymore. Weeping for Tammuz doesn't have to occur anymore during the 70th week of Daniel, because Tammuz comes back to earth in the form of the Antichrist. So the Mystery Babylon goddess-based worship system, the goddess is saying in Revelation 17, "I'm not a widow anymore. My son Tammuz has come back to life in the form of, my husband Nimrod, who died and made me a widow, came back to life in the form of my resurrected son Tammuz." Tammuz is the Antichrist. So the Mystery Babylon type religion, goddess woman who is extant in the 70th week of Daniel isn't the actual literal Semiramis, but it is her spirit, the type. She's saying, "I am no widow" in Revelation 17, because my husband's come back to me in the form of Tammuz. The Antichrist is here. Now you don't have to weep for Tammuz anymore because Tammuz came back to life. The Antichrist is here. Tammuz is the Antichrist. But then Tammuz goes into the temple and declares himself to be God himself. Now he doesn't need his Mystery Babylon mother, goddess-based worship system. So Antichrist, God puts it in his heart, destroy Mystery Babylon. Destroy the harlot. Mystery Babylon will be destroyed by the Antichrist during the tribulation period. Genevieve.
I had a question. So that woman that is put away for 1,260 days is the mother?
Is the mother. What do you mean?
When I read about the 1,260 days after they take away the baby, and then they put away that.
What were you reading?
Revelations.
I think that was 12.
Okay.
I think she's talking about Revelations 12.
Read it, Steve.
What, verse 14? Let's see.
Where
The woman in the wilderness for.
Yeah.
Yes, and then they
She's-
put away.
I think you're a chapter before. You're talking about chapter 12.
Yes.
So read it and then so I can understand your question. 'Cause
Yeah,
I know what I think the answer, but I'm not sure what your question is. So tell me what your question is again.
When they put her away for 1,260 days, that was the mother that was put away.
I'll read Revelation chapter 12, verse 5 and 6. And she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared for God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days.
That doesn't.
No, that's a total different imagery.
Okay,
Don't
sorry.
divorce that has nothing to do with what we're talking about now. What we're talking about now is the Mystery Babylon goddess-based system. What we're talking about in Revelation 12 is it's talking about, God is going to supernaturally preserve those that are part of remnant Israel to protect Israel from being wiped out by the Antichrist. So 12 has nothing to do with 13. It's completely different imagery. They use imagery in both because it paints a more profound picture. But no, that doesn't have anything to do with it. Revelation 13, on the other hand, is the culmination of Revelation 18 is now the culmination of Antichrist coming to the throne halfway through the tribulation period. He is now no longer in need of the Mystery Babylon system. So God puts it in his heart to get rid of the harlot. So in Revelation 18, Antichrist himself kills his own mother. The Mystery Babylon goddess-based Semiramis worship system is no longer necessary because Satan finally has what he wants. He used the woman in the Garden of Eve, to make the husband fall, Adam, to enslave the human race in bondage of sin. He used the prototype of the woman as the first witch, the Wiccan, women trying to get a better deal, women on top, feminism, through the use of occultic knowledge. And he's been using that for 6,000 years. Feminism's come to the full now, the Me Too movement, all of these things. But halfway through the Antichrist revelation ruling on the earth, once he declares himself to be God, Satan will enter him. He's going to be assassinated, resurrected. He won't need the Mystery Babylon system as a counterfeit. Satan won't have to dress and drag anymore. Satan will be able to manifest himself in human form in the physical body of the Antichrist, who will be a Nephilim metahuman. And they will get rid of the Mystery Babylon goddess-based worship system, get rid of the Catholic Church, get rid of Christianity, and everybody will worship the devil in the form of his son, the Antichrist, by taking the mark, which will cause him to be condemned to hell forever. And if you refuse to take the mark, so that you can avoid being condemned to hell forever, you'll be killed on the spot by having your head cut off. That's what Jesus is telling us to be afraid of and to warn ourselves of. And he said in Matthew 24:15, when therefore you see that abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, flee. For there shall be great tribulation, such as was not from the beginning of the world to this time, nor shall ever be. And if those days weren't shortened, nobody would live. Micah chapter 5, verse 5 and 6. Do you have that for me, Genevieve?
5 and 6.
Yeah.
And this man shall be the peace when the Assyrian shall come into our land, and when he shall tread in our places, then shall we raise against him 7 shepherds and 8 principal men, and they shall waste the land of Assyria with the sword, and the land of Nimrod in the entrances thereof. Thus shall he deliver us from the Assyrian when he cometh into our land, and when he treadeth within our borders.
Okay, so that's the passage that Joe Chambers used that says the Antichrist will be an Assyrian and that he'll be coming from Babylon in Iraq. So, again, let's take a look real quickly as we finish up Daniel chapter 11. The will for king passage. Antichrist is again referred to in Daniel chapter 11. He says, verse 3, a mighty king shall stand up, that shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. That's why he's called the willful king. He's going to do whatever he wants, as opposed to what God will do. And he will, reject the God of the Bible or whatever. And it says, verse 36 says that the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, meaning the God of the Bible, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. Verse 37, he says, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers. That's why some people think here that Antichrist is at least partially Jewish, because the God of his fathers would be the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of the Bible. It says he won't regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women. So some people think the Antichrist will also be a homosexual, because he doesn't, he's not into women. Nor shall he regard any God. And we do see homosexuality on the rise. Is it tied to the rise of the Antichrist? Probably in some way. Certainly Satan doesn't want heterosexual marriages, one man, one woman, for the purpose of family rearing. He wants sex to be just recreational so that it divides and splits the human race and leads to non-reproduction and abortion and blood sacrifices. And then it goes on to say, verse 38, he shall not regard the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all. Again, this is Antichrist going into the temple, declaring himself to be God, the abomination of desolation Jesus spoke about. And this is what Jesus is saying, when the abomination of desolation occurs, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, well, it says it right there in verse 36 of Daniel 11, that, he's going to exalt himself as God. And it says, verse 37, neither shall he regard the God of his forefathers, nor the desire of women, nor will he regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. Verse 38, but in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, Satan, our God, whom his fathers knew not, and shall honor with gold and silver and precious things and pleasant things. Antichrist is going to be one with Satan, who is his biogenetic father, and spiritually will live inside him. Verse 44, but tidings out of the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly, and to make away many. And then it says, verse 45, and he shall plant his tabernacles in the palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, and yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. So that passage is interpreted that he will move his palace from Babylon. It starts out as a religious thing in Rome, in the Vatican, moves to Babylon in Iraq, and then eventually moves from Babylon in Iraq to the city of Jerusalem, which is the city of the great king, and that's where he's going to make his last stand, and that's where the Battle of Armageddon will occur, where Jesus will come down from heaven himself and will dispatch of him. And so, Revelation chapter 6, verse 2, anybody that gets to that real quick, then you go to Revelation 19, 11 and 14. So so Antichrist will eventually, I think, move from Rome to Babylon and Iraq to Jerusalem. And we'll go through it right here on our chart. Again, Antichrist will go from Rome, and Rome isn't depicted on our map here, but it's somewhere over here. So he comes from Rome, goes eastward to reestablish his throne in Babylon and modern-day Iraq, which would be place it right about here. Here it is in modern-day Iraq, city of Babylon right there. And then he's going to move all the way back, eventually into the city of Jerusalem, to try to enter into the temple to declare himself to be God. And that's where he will encounter Jesus Christ, and they will have the battle of Armageddon. Revelation chapter 6, verse 2, who has that?
And
Oh, go ahead, Genevieve.
And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer.
All right, so he said, you know, John is seeing this vision in Revelation 6, basically, of the Antichrist imitating or mimicking Jesus. Verse 6, Revelation chapter 6, verse 2. And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat upon him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. Antichrist is going forth with a bow, doesn't have any arrows. He's going out as a peacemaker at first. He's going to win over the whole world by striking up this peace treaty, which we talked about in Daniel chapter 9. In fact, Steve didn't read the final passage. You read 24 and 25?
Of Daniel chapter 9?
Yeah.
I didn't get 27.
Yeah, do 27 for us. You know, in essence, what Steve would read to you is that, you know, during Daniel chapter 9, verses 25 and 26 and 27, go ahead and read that for me, Steve.
And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even unto the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate.
Okay, and so what we see then is that the 70th week of Daniel, the first weeks, we've got weeks 1 through 69, we see laid out for us in Daniel chapter 24, 25, and 26. And then it talks about in the midst of the week shall he stop the oblation. What week? He said in the midst of the week, that week.
70th
Read that
week.
Passage again, that's the 70th week.
And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week.
Okay, so now, and that's verse 27, I believe.
Yes.
And he shall confirm the covenant for 1 week. Now he's not talking about the first 69 weeks. He's talking about the last 70th week. He's going to have a 7-year peace treaty, Antichrist, and in the midst of the week, he's going to do what?
He shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation.
He's going to make it desolate by going into that temple after breaking the peace treaty and declaring himself to be God. That's what Jesus is talking about in Matthew 24:15 when he says, you know, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, he's going to make that 7-year peace treaty, rebuild the temple, and then halfway through it, he's going to break the peace treaty, go into the temple, and Paul tells us, adds on, he's going to go into the temple as God, you know, the temple of God, showing himself that he is God, and declare himself to be God. So he, as God, enters into the temple of God, showing himself that he, the Antichrist, is God. That's the abomination of desolation of Matthew chapter 24, verse 15, that Jesus is making reference to. What Genevieve just read was Antichrist coming on the scene right after the rapture, counterfeiting himself, pretending to be God. And he looks just like, you know, that passage there causes a lot of people, Seventh-day Adventists, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, to think that's Jesus Christ. No, that's the Antichrist. But we see the real Jesus Christ in Revelation chapter 19, verses 11 through 14, Ben.
And I saw heaven opened, and behold a white horse. And he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he doth judge and make war. His eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns, and he had a name written that no man knew, but he himself. And he was clothed with a vesture dripped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean.
And there we are. The church makes a reappearance, but we're no longer called the church. We're now the bride of Jesus Christ. We're the church before the rapture. But the church disappears from the Bible in Revelation chapter 4 when John is told to come up here. You don't any longer see the church being referred to. Now you see the bride of Christ and Jesus Christ. We've now been married to Jesus. We're the engaged, the betrothed to Jesus, his bride to be when we're the church. But after the rapture, we go up to heaven. We actually become his bride. We become the bride of Christ. We get robes. We get these new supernatural resurrection bodies. and we come back with him in victorious warfare against the Antichrist at Armageddon, which Steve is going to close out and tell us about. So, now that Jesus has come back with his married to him church that's become the bride of Christ, at Armageddon we see the final conflict between good and evil, God in the form of man in Jesus Christ, and Satan in the form of a man in the person of the Antichrist go head to head, and this is the ultimate resolution. Revelation chapter 19, verses 19 to 21, Steve.
And I saw the beast, and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse and against his army. And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast, and them that worshipped his image. These both were cast alive into a lake of fire burning with brimstone. And the remnant were slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse, which sword proceeded out of his mouth, and all the fowls were filled with their flesh.
So we see the Antichrist referred here to as the beast. And the kings of the earth gathered together to make war against him that sat on the earth. They're gathered together where? We find out in Revelation 16 at Armageddon, the valley at the foot of the Megiddo Mountains, the mountains of the city of Megiddo. The beast is taken, with him the false prophet, the second beast. And this is the guy that did the supernatural signs and wonders. And they are cast alive into the lake of fire. Goodness forbid. And the remnant that were fighting with them are killed with the sword. They won't appear again until 1,000 years later. And 1,000 years later, I'll just read that to you. In Revelation chapter 20, verse 10 through 15, Jesus has now thrown the Antichrist and the false prophet in the lake of fire and killed all of his followers at Armageddon. In Revelation chapter 20, verses 10 through 15, after reigning on the earth with his church for 1,000 literal years here on the planet Earth physically, he says, verse 10, the devil that deceived them was cast alive into the lake of fire and brimstone where the beast and the false prophet are. They were thrown there 1,000 years earlier. They're still there being tormented in the lake of fire. So Jehovah's Witnesses are wrong. Annihilationism is not biblical. The Antichrist and the false prophet that got thrown into the lake of fire 1,000 years earlier haven't burned up yet. They're still there when Satan joins them from the bottomless pit 1,000 years later at the end of the millennial reign of Christ. And it says, and they shall be tormented day and night forever. So there's perpetual, physical, conscious, sentient suffering that didn't end when Antichrist and the false prophet were thrown into the lake of fire initially. And then he says, verse 11, and I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and heaven fled, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God. These are the guys that Jesus killed at Armageddon at his return, who are on the Antichrist army, and every person that has ever lived on the planet Earth, and we'll go to our 7,000-year Bible timeline chart, every person from the fall in the Garden of Eden, from Cain and Abel, all the way through to the millennial reign of Jesus Christ's end here, those persons will be called up to the great white throne judgment. I got it, that's okay. To the great white throne judgment at the end of the 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ, and they will be put on trial, and we see it referred to right here. This is exactly what happens. After 1,000 years, all of the dead are called up to the great white throne. Verse 12, and I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened, and another book was opened. The Lamb's Book of Life is where your name is written after it's originally written in the Book of Life. So you got the Lamb's Book of Life and the Book of Life. And after the Book of Life is written, your name should be in there when you're born. When you're born physically, your name is written in there. After you're born again a second time, your name is written a second time. So, what we find out then, everybody whose name isn't written in the Lamb's Book of Life, this second Book of Life, they go into the lake of fire. And we see that terrible moment depicted for us right here in Revelation chapter 19, 20. It says, and I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God. The books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged out of those things that were written in it, according to the works. If you're judged according to the works, that means you went to the lake of fire. You don't want to be judged based upon works. You want to be based upon the work of Jesus Christ on the cross. And it says, the sea gave up the dead that were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in it, and they were judged, every man according to their works. Notice here that no man, after his works are judged, goes to heaven. It says, and death and hell were cast into the lake of fire, which is the second death, and whosoever's name was not found written in the book of life was cast in the lake of fire. So it doesn't say anything about, this guy was measured out and he had enough good works to get into heaven. No, everybody that goes to hell will be judged upon their works. Their works will determine where in hell they're going to be forever. But none of those people will make it into heaven. Good works can't save you. They can only condemn you to a different section of hell. So finally, we find out that the long war against God will draw to a merciful close, and Steve will read that to us from Revelation chapter 21, 1 through 4. Eventually, the church, which is now the bride of Christ, will join in the glorious victory party of the bride of Christ, Jesus Christ, as the battle of the ages, the long war against God, finally draws to a close and the eternal state can begin. And I wish it started today, but it'll be soon. Revelation 21, 1 through 4 is what we have to look forward to.
And I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them, and be their God. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away.
Oh, man, if that doesn't...
Tell you what, man.
Every time I read, it brings tears to my eyes, man. I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and first earth that passed away, sin in the first heaven and earth was going to be gone forever. And there was no more sea. And I saw the new Jerusalem coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her heaven. And it says, great voice from heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them. And they shall be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. And verse 4, that's a powerful verse. And God shall wipe away all the tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow, nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain. For the former things have passed away. And, spiders won't be, killing the pathetic fly trapped in the web anymore. That'll be all over with. Spiders and flies will love each other. There are even flies in the New World Order, in the new kingdom to come after the millennium. Everybody will love everybody else. Animals, nature will be restored to perfection. And all of those things, we'll have tears of joy in our eyes. And Jesus will wipe those tears away and we'll never be able to cry again. Because there'll be no more pain. No, can you imagine what it'd be like to not be able to be sorry about something?
No,
and not even.
it's.
I've never lived in that.
Yeah,
world.
how could you?
What's the mental state when you can't think of anything that makes you feel sorry? Gee, I'm sorry I did. Gee, I'm sorry I said. I was mad at Steve when I feel sorry that I said. And you have that regret.
Yeah.
You won't be able to feel sorry anymore,
It's-
and you won't be able to cry anymore. And it's going to be great because the former things will be passed away. And so, final thought. I'm going to plagiarize John, 1 John chapter 2, verse 18, and he said poignantly, little children, in verse 18, it is the last hour, and as you have heard that the Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have come, but which we now know that it is the last hour. And I would say to you boys and girls, be prepared, because it is the last hour. When you see Kanye West joining up with Joel Osteen, joining up with Laurie to create a new Hollywood slick, $100 a service, $500 for a sweater set type of Christianity being promoted, then you know that the apostasy is here. The church has departed from the biblical faith once delivered to the saints. That means the physical apostasy or the physical departure of the real church from the planet Earth is just about to occur. It could happen today. That would be great. But be prepared, because we are in a time of deception. Until then, we're at war. We're in the final stages, final phases of the long war against God. Satan is going to increase his assault, and we are going to have to be able to increase our steadfastness and our defense of the faith against the assaults of the devil. He can't destroy us and defeat us, but he can make war against us, and in war, people get hurt. Genevieve is a military retired person, she knows, and war people get killed. So there's going to be casualties on both sides, but we get resurrected. So if we die in the line of fire or get killed in action, so much the better. We get the martyr's crown. We get even more glory and honor before our Lord Jesus Christ. So with that, we end our series on the Antichrist. We will pick up in a couple weeks. We're going to try to do that survey that Jules had mentioned. Try to hit all 6 topics in a 2-hour session time. I got to prepare that outline and see if I can discipline myself to do all of that in one lump sum. So with that, then Ben, why don't you just go ahead and close us out this week? And Ben's got his book opening tomorrow. Anybody in the Miami area, we're going to be at Coral Gables Books and Books in Coral Gables tomorrow at 8 o'clock for Ben's debut of his 4th book.
It is.
It's the 4th book. And what's the name of the book, Ben?
My World Book 2.
So that's where I'm going to be. Everybody is somebody going to be in Coral Gables tomorrow for Ben's 4th book debut at the Books and Books in Coral Gables. So with that, Ben, close us out in prayer.
With pleasure. Well, Lord, here we're talking about a much more important book. We are so filled with gratitude, Lord, first of all, that you protected us over Halloween, and that you gave us the strength and the spiritual discernment and the means to place your holy word in scripture lines inside tracts into the hands of so many people. What a delight, Lord, to know that with your seed planted, there could be so many souls that were saved just one evening, one planting of seeds, one evening, Lord. What a blessing that was for us to partake in that with your protection and guidance. And thank you, Lord, so much for this study, for your most holy word, for giving us the discernment, Lord, to see that there are so many antichrists, small a, throughout the commercial church, that there are so many of our brothers and sisters who are falling into apostasy, who are falling away from true doctrine. And that is just so sad, Lord, to see that. On the other hand, we are glad, Lord, that in these last days of the last days, as eventually the Antichrist, capital A, will be revealed after our departure, that our departure is coming soon. So it is with deep gratitude that we are here, Lord, in this small home church. But we pray that this small home church and these videos are like seeds that are entering into the hearts of many people beyond our comprehension. And we have no idea how your word and your guidance to us here may be impacting lives today, tomorrow, and for who knows how long to come. So we pray, Lord, that you continue to protect us, give us discernment, knowledge, wisdom, Lord, and we pray that you keep us all protected in the name of your most holy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Tap us out there, and boom.